Today, the Supreme Court declined to hear the appeal of a lower court case that overturned North Carolina's voter ID laws. And this is very important. I come from North Carolina. I know how the voting works there. I've voted there many times. You walk up to the rolls, and they simply ask you for a name and address. So anybody can do this by going through the phone book. You don't have to present a photo ID of anything. It's not difficult to get a photo ID. You have to have a photo ID to cash a check, to fly on a plane, but not to vote in an election. And it was interesting to see what the rationale for this was. Of course, they're saying the Supreme Court today refused to hear North Carolina's appeal of a lower court decision to strike down its voter ID law, effectively killing the law. They will be back. They're not going to let this stand. But then they say that they would not hear it because they upheld the lower court's decision that said it targeted black voters, quote, with almost surgical precision. Seriously? If you were targeting black voters with surgical precision, this would be very insulting. Let's look at what the lower court said. They said the law required voters to present an approved form of photo ID before casting a valid ballot. That targets black voters with surgical precision. They can't or don't have any photo ID. That's absurd. Next one, reduce the early voting period from 17 to 10 days. So what are they saying here? That black people can't vote within a 10-day period, but other people can? Then they go on to say it eliminated out-of-precinct voting. It eliminated same-day registration of voting. It eliminated pre-registration by 16-year-olds. So basically what they're saying is black people can't take photo IDs. They can't find where the polling places are, and they can't vote on the days of the election. The U.S. government knew how to run an election when they did it in Iraq. They were concerned that there might be voters coming across the border from other countries voting, but they made sure they had the election on the same day. They had paper ballots. They painted people's thumbs purple, if you remember when they had that election. That's precisely what the Democrats don't want to have. What this did was this precisely targeted the means of skirting an election. And I told you how it's done in North Carolina. And I've mentioned before that a friend of my brother-in-law's called him and said, I went to vote and they told me that I had already voted. And my mother had already voted, even though she's dead. Now, that was not reported to the Election Commission. They said nothing like that ever happens. It does happen. People don't report it because they know that you're not going to do anything about it. But Rand Paul points out what the real Jim Crow laws are. And he talked about Attorney General Jeff Sessions' plans on reviving aspects of the drug war that even Obama did not do. And of course, this is bringing back mandatory minimums and going after nonviolent first-time offenders just based on the quantity of marijuana that you have, for example. I have to say, this is the very definition of insanity, that we would go for 46 years doing this insane war on drugs and thinking that by doing the same stuff, we're going to get different results. We've gotten just the opposite results of what we wanted to have. We've had more people and more concentrated forms of the drugs appear, as well as organized crime that has soared, as we see coming across the border. That is the real problem with what's coming across the border. That is what's created the Sinaloa cartel, the Zetas, the MS-13. They have grown up on the war on drugs. Prohibition is the mother's milk to organizations like that, just like it was to Al Capone. But let's take a look at what Rand Paul said. He said this is an op-ed piece, actually, that he wrote on CNN today. And Rand Paul said the Attorney General on Friday made an unfortunate announcement that will impact the lives of millions of Americans. He issued new instructions for prosecutors to charge suspects with the most serious provable offenses, quote, those that carry the most substantial guideline sentences, including mandatory minimum sentences. Well, first of all, this is going to fill up our jails. We know what happened when Ronald Reagan and his Attorney General did this. They started filling up jails with nonviolent offenders. They couldn't build the new jail cells quickly enough, and they were releasing violent offenders into the streets so they could fill up these mandatory minimums. Then, going further, he says mandatory minimum sentences have unfairly, disproportionately incarcerated a generation of minorities. As Rand Paul said, Eric Holder refrained from seeking longer sentences for non-violent drug offenders. He said, I agree with him, still do. In fact, he was the author of a bipartisan bill with Senator Leahy to change the law on the matter. He said, until we pass that bill, though, the discretion on enforcement and how it affects the lives of many young drug offenders lies with the current Attorney General. He said we should be treating this for what it is, a public health crisis. It's a public health crisis. It's a medical issue. It is a psychological issue. It is a spiritual issue, but it will not be solved by law enforcement. Trying to solve this by law enforcement and going for the end users, which they never did during alcohol prohibition. And of course, we've talked about how this is an agenda that was created by the United Nations 10 years before Richard Nixon declared the war on drugs and copied their agenda verbatim, schedule by schedule, drug by drug. This is a UN agenda. This is unconstitutional. There's no constitutional amendment like there was to prohibit alcohol, but this is what he goes on to say. This is where the real connection to voting ID goes. He said, if I told you that 1 out of 3 African-American males is forbidden by law from voting, you might think I was talking about Jim Crow 50 years ago. Yet today, 1/3 of African-American males are still prevented from voting, primarily because of the war on drugs. So they want to make a big deal out of voter ID. Why? Because the Democrats want to have the opportunity to have fraud. They want people to be able to vote early, vote often, vote without identification. But if they really cared about minorities and people who lose their rights to own guns, people who lose their rights to vote, people who are locked up at our expense, if we're not suffering from it in our family, we're seeing other families torn apart, and then we are given the bill to lock these people up to destroy their lives. And when they get out of jail and they tell people that they've been convicted for a drug felony, it makes it difficult for them to get a job. That is what the war on drugs is doing to us. It's absolutely insane. And to keep repeating this process, to bring this up just when we were moving in the opposite direction is absolutely wrong. I think Jeff Sessions is a man of integrity, but I think he's absolutely wrong on this issue.
The reason InfoWars Life has 5-star ratings on major third-party sites is because I want products I'm going to use for my family. I take this, my family takes this, and then it funds the operation with the most hardcore, truthful information you're going to find anywhere. So what you find in our news is the same thing you find in our products at InfoWarsLife.com.
If I ever forget to take them, I have a noticeable difference. I don't feel good. The nascent iodine is one of the ones that was life-changing for me.
Yeah, I actually have just run out of my super female. I had a few bottles at my house, and I've been taking it again, hitting the gym once again. Very exciting, feeling great, looking good. So, and I know my hair is luxurious once again. So obviously the super female is amazing. I love it.
Nascent iodine is essential. Survival Shield X2. If there's one product that I would say is life-changing that I would suggest, it's Nascent iodine Survival Shield X2. It's got a 5-star rating.
It's a win-win. InfoWarsLife.com.